I do want to, I've heard different words here, and in terms of connection with others, I have heard being genuinely curious about the other, and I'm using the word the other on purpose. I've heard the word tolerance, right? That we're tolerating that different people are different from us. We like to use the word at AJR, cherishing, that we actually cherish this difference and that we feel we can learn from it, which is different from tolerating that people are different from you.
You know, I think of pluralism, I think of being able to create a safe, loving space for students at Penn who are Shomer Nagia, who don't touch people of the opposite sex, to have a vibrant, non-egalitarian minyan where women can't lead, and also to have a vibrant reform minyan where women can lead. And I think it's interesting that AJR is pluralistic, yet there's no space for non-egalitarian folks. And so I think, you started to play with this, Aura, but I think I would say that there are three levels. There's the individual level, there's kind of an organizational level, and Hillel and a seminary like AJR function in totally different ways, which is because, I would add, I guess, is a denominational level, right? And so Hillel can have much broader boundaries because our idea is Judaism in the largest sense, and we don't have to get stuck on particular Jewish values in that way. Though Israel, again, it gets more complicated, right? You mentioned the word cherish, so I just wanted to tell another story. The first Friday night when students are on campus every year, it's unbelievable to see what happens. All these bright, shining young faces come to the University of Pennsylvania, and there's about 600 people in Hillel, and there's all these kids in the Orthodox minyan, and they're about to walk out, and maybe many of them, for the first time ever, meet a Jew in a Jewish setting that's not Orthodox. And my hunch is that for 90% of them, they think, not a real Jew. They meet the conservative kids, the Reform kids, the Reconstructionist kids, they say, not real Jews. And the conservative kids are sitting there going, wow, there's a lot of Orthodox kids up there. And and they're really different than I am. And the Reform kids are saying, wow, there's a lot more Jews of every other type at services than we, and they look different, and I'm wearing jeans and everyone else is dressed up. And then, that's great, there's 600 people in the building, and then there's, another 1,900 Jews who did not come to services, who walk by Hillel and see it packed through the windows at night as they're headed out to a frat party to go drinking and say, wow, those are super Jews. I'm not as Jewish as they are, or I'm really Reformed. And so that's what I start every year with. And when I think about pluralism, I don't know if the goal is to cherish. I think that is certainly like the asymptotic line I would like to shoot for, but no, I'll never get there. But I think maybe the idea that I would like to get to is respect. To be able to see beyond one's own individual sense of Judaism and to say, I don't totally understand this. It can't be my Judaism, but I'm committed enough to a larger whole that I'm willing to enter into a relationship with you and not to see you purely as other, right? The highest level is the cherish, right? Maybe John at the end of college when he could go see Debbie Friedman on a Shabbat morning, maybe he was cherishing all of Jewish religion and culture at that point. And of course there are always boundaries. As a rabbi, I have much more narrow boundaries than I do as a Hillel director about who's Jewish, about what kind of weddings I can officiate at, about who I could count in a minyan, things like that. And even with, Brad, you kind of gave a good pushback about the Israel conversation. I did handle it in the way that you suggested, right? Which is that of course there's a pragmatism, but I think in every one of those situations, well, I'll tell you one story, because it's always better to talk in stories than abstractions. I'm glad this is going to be on Shalom TV. Throughout the whole BDS crisis last year, the boycott, divestment, sanction crisis, the Jewish students involved in boycott, divestment, sanction kept coming to me to talk to me about it, which was a very weird position to be in because personally I disagreed with what they were doing. I didn't think they were my enemy, but I disagreed with this as a way to try to make Israel the Jewish state that they want it to be. But I also had an obligation to them as Jews beyond the political, and it was bizarre. Right? So somehow, and I think the answer, right, or if there's a couple that comes and wants to have me officiate at their wedding and they are not Jewish by the way that I, in my own Judaism, define that. And I think the only way to do that is with love, right? And without saying that you are not Jewish, but to say, I'm part of a community that has these standards, and thank God we live in a pluralistic Jewish world where there's not just one answer. But for me, like, you have to be with the right rabbi, and I have to be the right rabbi. And in this case, it's not, because I wouldn't be comfortable. But I'm happy for you guys. I love that you found the right person to spend your life with, and I want to help you. And I say, often I'll say to people, I'm going to bend over backwards to make sure you get the right rabbi, not just a referral. And it was essentially the same thing with the Jewish students who were involved in the BDS crisis, which was I treated them with love and respect, and I said, look, we disagree politically about how to go about transforming Israel into the country we want it to be, but as a Jew, I'm here for you. And look, it's a little bit of a political sweet spot, but I think if you can do it honestly and with love, you're never going to satisfy everyone. There's going to be some measure of tension, some measure of dissatisfaction, but they will feel honestly as one human being to another that there's some measure of love and respect, even if there can't be full cooperation.
So I think you're seeing the turn, and whether it's cherish, which is a word I actually like a lot, or respect and love, which they're not the worst terms to go with either. I mean, you probably get my general predisposition is to try and grab them all, not to choose which one is right. But I think something significant is going on. We tend to confuse, especially when it comes to pluralism in Jewish life, to confuse practices with values. Right? How you get married is not a value in and of itself. It's a practice. Jew to Jew, Jew to non-Jew, straight, gay, those are not in and of themselves values. Those are practices. Actually, all of them can encode the same values. But not all people will choose to live out that shared value in the same way. And so the first thing to do, especially when it's institutional, is to step back and ask, is this a practice fight or a values fight? Right? Kashrut, Shabbat, who is a Jew? None of those, no matter how much we try to make them, are values. By the way, I believe in all of them. But they're not independent values. They are ways of encoding values. And we tend to want to ramp everything up for two reasons. Because first of all, we're trained to be very nervous when we have to live with the fact that someone else could encode a shared value in a way we can't stand. Somehow we're trained, and there are reasons for that in Western intellectual tradition. It's interesting because it actually runs counter to rabbinic tradition, to imagine that if the same value can be encoded in an absolutely diametrically opposed way, it must diminish it. And of course, all you have to do is look at rabbinic tradition to know, wow, the whole tradition is people who were diametrically opposed to each other, but because they believed they were sharing a certain value set, could get through it. So the first thing is to ask about that difference. And then the word that I would use, and here we'll go from one of my most cherished Jewish teachers, is a man named Bishop Christer Stendel, who was the Lutheran Bishop of Stockholm and then a professor of theology at Harvard Divinity School. And Bishop Stendel used a phrase that I think is really helpful. The phrase was sacred envy. And what he meant by sacred envy was both envy of the sacred and feeling envious in ways that are sacred. And it really hinged on being able to say, I really can't stand over there. Over there is really there. It's not here. But as I look over there, I see beauty. I see wisdom. I see truth that from over here, I actually can't live out to the fullest. Now, it's still going to be over there, and they will still be they. But there are they that I look at and go, oh my God, how wise, how beautiful, how good. And not because I'm running over there. Right? And at some level, the way you know you're feeling this is if simultaneously you can always be answering 4 questions for yourself. What are you most proud of about where you stand? What are you most ashamed of about where you stand? Because that's when you find out if you're really committed. And no, we don't disagree at all. That was the point of the whole story, Mark. The commitments are absolute and episodic. The confusion is because we still don't believe it's possible to have a commitment that is both absolute and momentary. But we're the people who created all-around law. Legal reality is about everything being able to be episodic and absolute. So simultaneously, what are you both proud of where you stand, ashamed of where you stand, and what are you really envious of about a place you have no intention of standing? And what really makes you angry about them over there? And if you can allow all four of those to speak to you, right, that would be my version of both cherishing and loving and respecting. But I don't get the credit for the term. Bishop Stendhal does. He called this sacred envy.
That's great. Thank you.